It's spring. By golly, it's Easter. Everywhere there are signs of renewal. But I have to tell you, that's not what's been on my mind lately. Instead of daffodils or even resurrection, what's been on my mind has been resistance. Specifically, the resistance has been on my mind. Well, it's from a scene in a play, the play Jesus Christ Superstar. All that education and Andrew Lloyd Webber is still my muse. The moment that has a hold on me actually is a very human moment. It's the moment in the life of a man, of a human. It could be any one of us. The scene takes place during Holy Week, so it's appropriate for today. It takes place on the night of Passover, the night that's come to be known as the Last Supper, when Jesus has just celebrated the Passover meal with his disciples. And in case you're wondering, there is a version of this in the New Testament too. It's not only Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice who recount this. So the scene is that Jesus is alone. He's had the meal, and he knows he's going to be betrayed. And he's feeling some resistance. And this betrayal that's coming, it isn't a simple matter. It's not just that people are upset with him over theological disagreements. The betrayal isn't like a team rivalry, or it isn't even whether Jesus is the Son of God, or one God is better than another, or maybe Jesus is or is not a miracle worker. It's none of that. The betrayal isn't theological at all. It's political. The betrayal is about power. So the backstory for this dramatic moment, which I did learn in theology school, is that Jesus, the historical figure, the man, was a public teacher. And during the course of his teachings, he practiced what Dominic Crossan, one of the scholars of the historical Jesus, called open commensality. This practice, open commensality, was the practice of welcoming anyone, and I mean literally anyone, to a common table for meals. This open table was radical and deeply threatening, both politically and socially. Then, as now, there were many people in power who benefited from the hierarchies and social stratifications. There were economic efficiencies created by these stratifications and keeping people separated socially. There are things like respect or a living wage that are easier to deny someone that you aren't in contact with. So here's where the open commensality became so tricky. Jesus was giving people of all castes and classes the idea that they belonged at the same table, even with people who might have more social or economic privilege. Jesus was inviting people to dine together, to be real with each other, even though all the social strictures at the time said this violated any code of appropriate behavior. So the high priests and the teachers were getting very nervous about the potential for a revolution. In the New Testament book of Luke, there's a place in which story tells of the priests conferring with each other and starting to get nervous, and they're looking for ways to get rid of Jesus, not because they're afraid of Jesus, but because they're afraid of the people. Jesus was empowering them. He was an instigator. That's what made him so dangerous. It wasn't about the question of his divinity, it was about the politics. The historical Jesus was a radical who subverted the power dynamics of the time, and people wanted to get rid of him because of it. It's a story we've seen play out over and over again over the course of history, even in our own lifetimes with visionary leaders. In this scene that's been on my mind, Jesus, the man, knowing that a betrayal is coming, he sits alone in the garden and he asks God to spare him. As the story goes in the play, the lyrics in the play are, "Take this cup away from me. I don't want to drink its poison." He doesn't want to be betrayed. He doesn't want to die. Who can blame him? That's the moment that's been gripping me. That moment of maybe losing faith. Jesus spent years, he committed his adult life to teaching in ways that were so compelling, he changed lives. And now it was catching up to him in ways that weren't even surprising. His teachings courted this moment from the very onset. In his plea, however, he isn't stepping away from any of that. He just sees the outcome and wishes to God there was another one instead. That's what makes this moment of resistance, take this cup away from me, so achingly haunting in its simplicity. He isn't quitting. He's naming his resistance. And who hasn't been there in some form or other? Who hasn't had a moment of wishing that in this moment some other outcome were possible? Resistance is natural to our experience. That's why Jesus' plea gripped me so much. It was so natural and so vulnerable. For a long time, I admit, I was confused about the concept of renewal. I thought renewal was kind of like a spa treatment. You know, if you worked hard and you got tired, then you'd go to the spa and you'd come back to your same old self, but, renewed. No transformation, it was just a form of pampering. I clearly didn't really get it. But over time, I've come to understand renewal differently, a little more nuanced. Now, I think of renewal, and I think it's kind of wild and unpredictable. Not so much like a spa treatment, but more like a transformation. The way a seed transforms into a plant. You might be surprised by the transformation. Renewal isn't about going back to a version of our old self. It's about integrating. It's about showing up fully as the new person we are now, the one we've become over time, the one who's taken life in and let it transform us. Renewal is a creative act, and it invites us to notice our resistance to change. Stephen Pressfield has written a book on resistance called The War of Art. It's a wise book on the psychology of creativity. Renewal, Pressfield writes, is the creative choice. It's the choice to stay in life and to carry with us all that we have been and all that we are. It's the awareness and recognition that we're always in the process of becoming. We're invited into each moment to integrate and become whole. And here's a key takeaway. If we can't or won't acknowledge what is, then we won't be renewed. Resistance prevents renewal. Renewal, as it turns out, has these prerequisites. It demands that we accept what is. It demands that we acknowledge the details we may be avoiding. It demands we face our fears and perhaps even name the cup of poison we don't want to drink. Renewal is what we feel when we take this moment and learn to tell a bigger story about ourselves, one that integrates all of our experiences. In this way, renewal is about becoming new. It's a creative act that transforms our old self into the new, larger self. Experiencing renewal doesn't mean that all is rosy and that everyone is happy always. Renewal isn't a placebo or a panacea, it's an invitation to wholeness. As all of us know, life can be demanding beyond reason, challenging beyond what we might believe is our capacity to bear it. Life can feel like it's just too much. We've all been there, overwhelmed. It's part of the human experience. Renewal invites us to be present with what Zorba the Greek called the whole catastrophe. We don't have to deny the hardships, but we have to acknowledge them. Renewal is the integration of our same old self with the changes, both better and worse, that life brings. Now, there may not be many here among us who are being persecuted for their actions or their beliefs in the same fashion that Jesus was. but few, if any of us, escape the bitter encounters of life. Death, disease, divorce, disaster, social isolation, the trauma of war, of poverty, racial discrimination, a litany of biases, betrayals, and prejudices. At any time, we may find there is a cup from which we don't want to drink. Today, you may be holding just such a cup. I wish I didn't know this moment so well in my own life. The last few years have been a bit too rich with these moments. A divorce that was difficult, followed by the death of my own mother, which was utterly heartbreaking. And then my sister's diagnosis with advanced cancer. These were not cups I wanted to drink from. I didn't want to believe, even for a moment, that accepting death or a terminal diagnosis was somehow going to make me a better person or more whole. It seemed ludicrous, frankly, even offensive. But when my sister was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, I discovered I was right there in that moment of choice, and I could either resist it, deny that it was really happening, let myself go numb a bit, and let my life carry on, well enough. Or I could really feel that resistance with all my might. Feel the anger, the hurt, the upset, the shock, the grief. And I chose to feel it. I wanted to ask for a different outcome. But even as I wanted it, I knew my call was to be with what is really happening. I've wanted to be with my sister as closely and as truly as possible, even if it was going to break my heart. And that, I suppose, is what took hold of me about this moment in the life of Jesus. Jesus, faced with the gravest betrayal, didn't give up on his life or teaching. He let it break his heart. In my own life, remarkably, in that choice to feel it all, to be present with what is, I felt an unexpected renewal. I felt an unexpected strength, and believe it or not, even a joy at being alive. I felt new again. Perhaps you know just what I mean from this. It's not that suddenly my sister is going to live a long life. It's that in naming and letting go of my resistance and letting go of my insistence on a happier outcome, one perhaps that I could script myself, I became more available to her as she really is, and more available to myself as I really am. And in that, there is strength, there is joy, and there is renewal. But personally, I don't particularly want an integrated life as a conceptual matter. I want an integrated life because then I get to feel the love that's in my life. And then I get to be present to truly surprising joys, even those as simple as a remarkable early crocus. When faced with the awful choice to be present to the unwanted circumstance, there's no easy out from this experience. What gripped me so about the plea of Jesus is how poignantly he expressed being in that moment, of simultaneously fantasizing he could escape his life and accepting that this is the life he's in. Jesus doesn't say he wished he'd never lived the life he had or taught as he taught. He's just wishing his life could have a different outcome. He's at that moment of choice between resistance and renewal. He's at that point of integration, naming his resistance and stepping into his future. He doesn't run, he doesn't hide. He allows his resistance to be named and takes it with him. He acknowledges that he is aware of the cost. Living costs us. There's always loss, even in renewal. For those of us who believe in the inherent worth and dignity of each individual, as we do in Unitarian Universalism, such integration and coming to wholeness is part of our theology. Renewal is the creative process we engage in by saying yes to what is. We have religious community as a place to practice our vulnerability, so that when we face a choice or experience we don't want to accept, we can witness for each other our own resistance. We can witness for each other the cost of being alive. And we can choose in the face of that to say yes to life and to invite and celebrate our renewal. Stephen Pressfield writes that resistance is a sign that something creative is trying to happen through us. On this glorious spring day, this Easter Sunday, we celebrate that choice. And may we take up that invitation to creativity and renewal. May it be so.